Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, it's Labor Day. By the time you get this, it'll probably be a few days after that, but nonetheless, I want to take this episode to celebrate each and every one of us that works. The dignity and worth of work and workers should not be skipped over. And so today, we'll talk about that, and we will celebrate in our own short and brief way, Labor Day. I say short and brief because this is a time when we should have the day off. We should be enjoying the time with family, those we care about, our loved ones. But I thought it was particularly important to go ahead and take this time on this important day to celebrate the day. Okay, so here we go. Let's talk about history. We could do this for a long, long time, folks, but I'm going to be very brief. I'll just give a few quotes over time to show you that from the beginning, labor has been a focus of our lives on this planet. I'll show a quick progression, again, skipping so many important and really salient points, but just to make a quick historical review to begin. So let's do that. How about the year 410 BC? Yeah, 410 BC. And the quote from Sophocles: "Without labor, nothing prospers." So from the oldest of times, Sophocles is specifically and pointedly mentioning labor, saying, without labor, nothing prospers. Holy cow. So, from the very beginnings of time, 410 BC. Well, let's jump way ahead just to save some time and really kind of get to some other points and talk about Adam Smith. Most of you in that business world, the world of economics, know that name well. Highly discussed, highly commented individual, Adam Smith. 1776. Adam Smith says, "Labor was the first price, the original purchase money that was paid for all things. It was not by gold or silver, but by labor, that all the wealth of the world was originally purchased." So originally there was no currency. There was only labor. And it was the labor that bought you something. It was the purchase. One more time from Adam Smith. Labor was the first price, the original purchase money that was paid for all things. It was not by gold or silver, but by labor, that all the wealth of the world was originally purchased. Adam Smith, back in 1776. Let's do one more, a little more current, and then we'll move on to some more topics. Now this one from 1941, John D. Rockefeller. Quote, "I believe in the dignity of labor, whether with head or hand, that the world owes every man an opportunity to make a living." And that's really the call to labor. For a person to make that contribution, to gain that currency, to put food on their own table, shelter over themselves, to raise a family, to care and provide for them. That is because of the contribution they make with their labor. As Rockefeller says, the dignity of labor, whether with head or hand, and that the world owes every man an opportunity to make a living. Okay, So where are we today? 2024. That's what I've titled this episode, Labor Day 2024. Well, we're in a different place, right? At the moment, we're in a relatively good place. There is a current resurgence in support of labor and certainly of labor unions. I've done several podcasts before on unions, on collectivism. I've made some points. I'll make them quickly here again. That a rising tide does, in fact, raise all boats. Okay, that's the word picture. Makes sense. Rising tide should, in fact, does raise all boats. So what do we know when we operate collectively and the tide, in fact, rises? Because we know that with the case of unions, wages would rise, benefits would rise, particularly things like health insurance, family leave, maternity leave, advanced and improved with the advent of labor unions. And when unions rise, so do non-union workers' work experiences as well. So this is that rising tide raising all boats. But there is a body that says no, says that no. And that comes from this tension. The tension that exists forever, but certainly is pronounced in our world today, the tension between democracy and capitalism. Now, Thomas Piketty, the author of the famous book on Capital, makes the argument and does so in a very analytic way to show that tension is real. It's unavoidable. And so what we learn is that in a democracy, we would hope that, again, that rising tide would raise all boats, that people collectively would bargain for better pay, for better benefits, for better pensions. And whether union or not, the tide would rise for all similarly positioned workers. Well, what we know that we live in a capitalist society. And as Piketty's argument goes, what we want to do is have this concentration of wealth, this concentration of capital in the hands of the few rather than the many. So it's a conflict between if I invest in a company and the company succeeds, it prevails, the owners, the shareholders, the stockholders, they want those profits, and they are reluctant to share the profits. Why? Because that would be adverse to them. They're all for not doing the work, not doing the labor, but wanting to benefit from the success of labor. And so there's this very real tension today. How so? How does it manifest itself? Well, in the United States, we have a number, frankly, far too many states. They call themselves right-to-work states. What does that mean? Oftentimes we use these fancy terms, right? Right to work. What that really means is anti-union. We don't want collectivism. No. We're all for that capitalism argument that Piketty makes, right? We think that the workers should work for as little as possible, that their benefits should be as little as possible, their pension, if it exists at all, as small as possible. Any capital that goes to labor, again, in their minds, comes away from the stockholder, the shareholder, the company. And so these states say, we don't want organized labor. We don't want collectivism. We want to be anti-union. But yet they have this clever term, a right to work. This worker should have a right to work, whether they belong to a union or not. And what happens is that it's adverse to workers. And so what really is going on here is saying that we need to not allow unions because they'll get a piece of the pie, and we don't want that. Those of you that know something about me, a little about me, know that I've had this incredibly fortunate life, a life much more fortunate, frankly, than I have deserved. But I had the great honor, truly great honor, to do my master's at Harvard. And I had the incredible experience of having my master's thesis supervised, overseen, and many, many, many rich and robust discussions about my work by perhaps the finest labor economist in the world, Richard B. Freeman, the Herbert S. Ashram Professor of Economics at Harvard and the supervisor of my master's thesis. Having conversations with Professor Freeman and being able to this day to call him a friend is just an incredible honor. He wrote a lot. He's written hundreds of articles in numerous books and edited more. He is a prize winner as the top labor economist in the world. But one of the things that he did was he wrote a book which is really one of the seminal books in labor economics, and it's called What Do Unions Do? It's written jointly between Richard Freeman and James Medoff. I'm going to read just one very short piece from it to show that the tension that I talked about with Thomas Piketty between democracy and capitalism, and yet the value and worth of dignity that I've given in the opening quotes. Here's the paradox, quoting from Richard Freeman. The paradox of American unionism is that it is at one and the same time a plus on the overall social balance sheet, he says in most, if not all circumstances, and a minus on the corporate balance sheet, again in most but not all circumstances. We believe that this paradox underlies the national ambivalence to labor. What I described a moment ago for these states that call themselves right to work, as if that's a good thing, right? Putting a positive spin on being anti-union, anti-collectivism. Because what happens is what might be good for society at large, for workers, individually and collectively, may not be good for that corporation. Okay, Richard Freeman, the book, What Do Unions Do? And I couldn't have a Labor Day without thinking of Professor Freeman. So I mention him here. Okay, so we have a tension between the corporations and its workers, between the workers making the products, delivering the goods, delivering the services, doing the work, doing the labor, and those that are owners, shareholders, stockholders. And the leadership role to ensure that those that have invested in their company are compensated for the good work that labor does, which is a fair argument, a fair discussion. So where do we strike that balance? Where do we say the workers should participate in the success of the enterprise that they have created? And at what point should those that invested in the enterprise to begin with should prevail for investing the capital that they did? Now, there's two sides to this. It's a good argument. I think it's a fair argument. But striking that balance, that is the challenge. And that is what we have to think about on a day like today, Labor Day. So, as Rockefeller said, there needs to be dignity to labor, whether with head or hand, and that the world owes every worker that opportunity to make a living, to be compensated for their efforts. Now, we know from the beginning that labor was really the currency, right? Not gold or silver. Talked about that with Adam Smith. And of course, from the very beginning, the Sophocles quote that I began with, without labor, nothing prospers. And so today, we should celebrate that at the moment, there has been a resurgence, and that is a good thing, that workers are often at the table, that they do have a voice, that they are gaining dignity, that collectivism is a good thing. Increasing wages, increasing benefits, particularly in healthcare, increasing pensions, the right then to provide for your family and for your life till the end of life. So labor could not be more important. It has been important from literally day one. We should absolutely give huge dignity to each and every one that works, whether it begin with head or hand, oftentimes both, to say thank you, to celebrate you, to give you that well-deserved dignity, and to know that without labor, our economy would not exist. All right, short comments, important comments. I really do want to make clear, folks, how important it is as a leadership matter that you, in your role as leaders, recognize the worth and dignity of those you serve and those that make the products, deliver the goods, provide the services, whatever it is that labor is doing in your world, that without it, we would be nowhere. So let's recognize it, let's give thanks, and with balance, reward it. Let's not talk about right to work. Honestly, nonsense. That is not the right thing. Leadership is about doing the right thing, and that is letting the rising tide raise all boats. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Happy Labor Day.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.